So perspective and 1 point perspective can feel really complicated, but with just these simple lines, we can actually take our page and transform it into a complicated scene with absolutely no fuss at all. Okay, so today we're going to be basically making 1 point perspective ridiculously easy. Perspective is something which I know can feel challenging, and when you start trying to draw out all the lines, and it just gets rigid, it gets stuck. And in my course on sketchloose.co.uk, I know that the biggest challenge that people have faced is in feeling happy to be loose with perspective. So in this video, I kind of wanted to just give you guys a really simple way of thinking about perspective. Instead of immediately jumping to the idea of perspective and drawing in a million different lines and trying to line everything up perfectly, why don't we just be three? Why don't we identify shapes, and then from those clear shapes comes a very easy way of identifying our perspective. So this video is all about that. It's about making 1 point perspective ridiculously easy. Through the video, we'll do a 5-step process, break down all the supplies we're going to use, and from there, I hope, in fact, I really believe that you'll be able to go out there, find your own 1 point perspective scenes and just be free and be able to sketch them and be happy with what you're producing, with the level of accuracy, with the level of character, and also just with the level of stress and fun that you're able to have, instead of finding it too difficult. All we'll be using today is just a handful of supplies. So I've got myself a A5 or half letter size watercolour sketchbook. This one's by Moleskine. I'm then going to use a fountain pen with some carbon ink in. This is waterproof ink and it's black. Waterproof is really important, but you could use any fountain pen, any fine liner with waterproof ink in. You could even use a ballpoint pen as long as it's waterproof. I've got a couple of brushes. I've got a size 6 round brush and a size 2 mop. Now the size 2 mop, you can see, is much bigger, but you could also use just a big round brush, or you could even just use one brush. You don't need loads of different bits and bobs to have fun sketching. And of course I've got my watercolours. There's 14 colours in here, but we're going to use 4. And the colours we're going to use are Cobalt Blue, Scarlet Lake, Hansa Yellow Medium. So these are the 3 lovely, bold, bright primary colours. So any blue, red and yellow. Then I'm going to use Moonglow, but you could equally use any sort of neutral toned colour. So a Payne's Grey. Even use like a sepia, or mix a burnt umber and a ultramarine together to make a nice grey. There you go. I'm talking nonsense already and we're not even in the tutorial yet. So what are we going to do with our scene? We're going to do 5 steps and I'm going to take you through them bit by bit. Let's go then straight away. Let's just dive in. So step 1, I'm going to be using my pencil. Got our reference up here. You can see it's a 1 point perspective scene. But what does that even mean? What does that even mean when we're thinking about perspective? Well, 1 point perspective means that we have a single vanishing point. So if we pop our vanishing point in just to the right of the page, the reason we do that is we can see in our image that that's where everything disappears. It's where the end of the street disappears, just to the right. From there, we have lots of lines coming out. So you can see the top of the roof near us comes out like this. You can see the bottom comes out like this. On the other side, you can see the roof lines sort of go along like this, don't they? And the bottom of the buildings come along like this. So what we've done now, as part of our step 1, is we've identified the overall shape of the scene. So step 1 is, for me, is always shapes. And shapes can mean different things. But in this case, what we've done is we've literally gone, what is the shape of the scene? And the shape is, we've got this big triangle and we've got this other triangle coming out the other side. And now we've already got our perspective sorted. Now the other key bit about 1 point perspective is there's a horizon line which comes along and it's always flat and it's always level with your vanishing point. And why is that useful here? Because on your horizon line, that is where everyone's heads will be. So when we come to add our heads, we know we've got this straight line and we just have to put all their heads there. Now a small person, their feet will be higher up, and a big person close to us, their feet will be lower down, but everyone's heads will still be on this line. So now we've identified the key features of our scene, and we can start putting in the other shapes. So what are the other shapes? Well, look, let's just work through it. Now I'm going to start with this tree, and this tree is basically a circle. Why am I starting with the tree? And you'll notice, by the way, that I'm drawing straight over these lines. You could do these lines in pencil, but you'll see as we sketch, actually, these lines will disappear. They're not a problem if you want to just go straight for it in pen and just add in these lines where we get the perspective of the scene in. You'll be able to draw on top, not a problem. If you can see them, they'll just add to the sort of drama and fun of the scene. Anyway, why am I adding in this tree? Because you'll see the vanishing point is not actually visible. And why is it not visible? It's because it's hidden basically behind this tree. And then what have we got coming out? So we've got basically a series of rectangles, haven't we? And we can base these rectangles. If you see, hopefully you can see what I mean. If you base these rectangles coming towards us, what you'll do, you'll build up by using these lines of perspective, you build up the side of this building. And then we have to change the perspective a little here because it's changing direction, it's changing plane. But we can just do that by eye. We don't need any more lines at this point. And we can build in this big rectangle. And then the top of it is just some funky shapes. It's a circle with a little rectangle, with a little sort of wavy rectangle on top, a little square. And then coming off to the side, we just got a big square disappearing, haven't we? So now we've got this half of the scene. And what have we done? We've just done big shapes for the perspective, then littler but still big shapes to build up the building. Now on this side, what have we got? Well, it's very difficult to see in many ways, isn't it? So because it's difficult to see, we can just do suggestions. So we know what it is really. It's going to be the same. It's a bunch of squares coming towards us. So we can just, having got our perspective lines in, we can just build in those squares. Now, as we get closer, we can actually start picking out details. So for example, we can see there's this giant thing coming up here. Now, we don't have this perspective line in all this way up, but we know that it starts sloping down, then flat, then up, then even more up. So all we have to do is just work out how do we draw a line which comes down here and goes down to our vanishing point. And it ends up being about this, ends up being about like that. We can pop that down, and then because this side of the building is facing us, it doesn't have any perspective, so it's just a simple rectangle. And draw this little detail on top. And then we can just keep coming towards us, and we can now pick out all these little shapes. So we got this rectangle, but do you see how it's got this dark side facing us here? So we can pick that out and even give it a little bit of hatching. Then underneath, it's got this other little building here. And then going up, it's got another taller building. That's the cream building, to this sort of slightly brown beige building, to then this wooden structure. Now this one's tough, isn't it? So how are we going to do it? Well, look, let's start with the simple shapes we can see. We can see all these windows forming squares, and then we can see a rectangle, which is the kind of facade at the front. And then underneath, you've got all these other squares forming the door and the windows. Then on top, we've got squares, rectangles, triangles. We just build those up gradually. And then we can find that the roof comes across, and it's basically just some rectangles like this. And then it goes down, and that's basically just another sort of square coming down. And without much fuss, we've therefore got the roof in. In front, it's cut off by this triangle going off to the side. So now we've got the edge as well. Then we can bring it down a bit more. We've got this kind of fence, don't we? And there we go. We've built our scene. So if we now take a step back and look, what have we got? We've got a scene, a street in a successful one-point perspective. But all we've done is we've simplified it into this big shape, then these smaller shapes, suggestions in the background, and then closer up, we've been a little bit more clever about it, a little bit more identifying specific shapes. And that's it. That's the end of step one. It's really as simple as that. So let's move on straight away to step 2, still using our pen. And now we're trying to add a bit more of the small shapes, a bit more of the details. So let's start over this side again. What have we got? Small shapes. We've got this rectangle or a window, depending on what you want to think. But for me, it's a rectangle. Coming down, it's got a couple of sort of rectangles and forming the balcony. Then we've got this kind of, I don't even know what to call it. It's a semicircle with a rectangle below it, isn't it? We don't need to know what the shape is, though, to recognise that we can simplify it into a shape, a concept of a shape. Then over here, we've got this lovely wall, which is made up of all sort of rectangles. We can just suggest them. We don't need to count them, just suggest them. Another window. It's an arch. There you go. It's an arch. Let's call it that. That's a nice way of naming it. And then at the top, we've got this kind of rectangle we left out initially. Some little details here. And then going off down here, we've got all these lovely little flicks coming out the side, which fit with this. We just need to really just apply some hatching. We don't need to do any more shapes over here because you can't see much. So all we need is to show that we can't see much, but it's rather in a deep shadow. And then we can start coming across. And what else can we add in? Well, look, we've got our people. And we know our people's heads are on the horizon line. So this is where that horizon line really starts to come into its own. People, of course, are shapes. So for me, people are a little circle with a triangle at the bottom. And we can just build in lots and lots of people. We can see, if we pop in our kind of pavement here, we can just start positioning people to be in the right place on our pavement. And there's lots and lots of them. And we just build up the noise of people in our scene. And there's another one in the front here. And look, they're not in proportion, are they? Because probably I've drawn this line at the bottom too low, but it doesn't matter. They're still getting the vibe, the feel of the scene. Now this tree, just add in some hatching to really create that light and shadow that it's got in the scene. And that's just going to really help with this kind of feel of light and shadow over here. Looking at it, we can actually give ourselves some hatching on this side as well. So we can just actually bring in all of this side into a bit of contrast. And then also we can even just look at this shadow just coming all the way across. We can just bring that shadow all the way across here. I want to stick over here for a little bit longer and just show you that everything else is still shaped. So we've got this traffic light. We can just bring that in. And things are going to get quite busy, but that's okay. It's so dark that we can't really see much. But just adding in some of these shapes to really show that we know what's going on, that we haven't left things out, and to just give this impression of this scene, this busy scene. That's what this is about. That's what this sketch is about. It's not about being perfect. So there's some more shapes there. Just simple rectangle with some sort of semicircles coming off the side. You can pop in the curve here. Pop in these little sort of traffic bollards in the bottom here. They're just cylinders. And that's that side of the sketch basically done, isn't it? I'm just going to bolden up the top here just to bring it into line with how the rest of the image feels. Now we can flip over to this side. Now this side, again, we can't really see much. We can just pick out suggestions. There's a sort of tool structure. There's little suggestions of windows. We've got quite a few sort of lights coming on the scene, so we can add the lights in if we want as a starter, because they're clearly an important feature of this scene. They add a lot of character. So there's our lights coming in, coming along. And notice how they're in perspective. This one's a bit too short for my perspective, and it's because I've done these two a bit tall. So I'm just going to make these ones shorter in the background. Then a few windows. We don't have to count the windows. You don't have to line them up perfectly. Just want to suggest. So just do these little marks which really just suggest that there's some windows going on in the background. Same here. We can just leave a couple of buildings blank, but a couple of buildings just suggest those windows. And where we've got shadow, like under this roof, let's just find some more of that hatching. Bring in a nice bold line. And that just clarifies that outline away from all that hatching we've added in. Same here, we've got these windows that just show that they're dark reflective objects by just adding in that hatching. And this door and down here. And there we go. What else can we add in? Well, let's just start getting some of these features of these lovely bright shops. We've got that lovely red shop front and a blue one, then a red one. Lots of different bits going back. And then as we get further back, we just start suggesting details. And then of course we've got this curve on this side as well. That also just points and disappears down the perspective. Just have a look around. Have we missed any bits of shadow? So yes, we missed this side here, didn't we? Missed that. But otherwise, I think we've done pretty well. I'm going to deepen a couple of little bits of shadow, like deepen these windows. Do you notice how they're much darker than the surrounding shadow on these buildings? So we can make them darker. And then over here, we can start just adding in our people. Again, you know, my horizon line is not perfect, so my people are a little bit out of proportion with my building. Now, I could note that and I could change it, or I could just stick with it and make my people sort of these kind of caricaturish kind of additions full of character that are going on in my scene. So accuracy, not important. For me, getting the feel of a busy scene, now that is what's important. And there you go, that's my step 2 done, little shapes and texture. And now we get to move on to the fun bit, step 3, where we start splashing on colour. Now what I'm going to suggest is that we lose the idea of needing to be realistic with our colours. Well, or at least needing to be totally representative. And instead we stick with finding key highlights and just letting everything else work itself out. So for example, we got this sky, this lovely blue sky. So let's get that sky in just really loosely. We can then just move that colour around by taking our brush, wetting it and pushing and pulling our colour until we have a nice, slightly dramatic but blue sky. Touch in a bit of blue here and there, get that texture, get that flow of colour. And there you go. So now we've got a really interesting sky. Then we want that to link into all this lovely shadow. So I'm going to take my moon glow now, and I'm just going to bring that moon glow straight down on all these areas of shadow. And I'm going to let it push and pull with that blue. So now the blue, the sky and the moon glow are going to flow together. And that's fine. That's actually not just fine. It's exactly what I want to happen, because that just makes things feel more fluid and connected. Next, what else have we got? Well, we've got these lovely areas of brightness. So I'm going to simulate that brightness with some yellow. So I'm going to get this yellow going into the street and mixing with our shadow, just a few touches. Come back with a clean brush. And again, we can just move that yellow around. And we can just bring it up some of these light, well-lit, sort of bright buildings. And all we're doing with this set of colour is we're setting the scene. In the next stage, we're going to be able to add some other colours. We're going to add some highlights, some specific highlights. So some of these red areas and things like that. But for now, what we're doing is we're just setting the scene. We're setting the light and the dark and the mood. And we can see that we're actually able to do that very quickly, very effectively, just using shadow and then the sky and then something to suggest sunshine, suggest light. Just going to do one more time with a clean brush. I'm going to blend and soften some of these areas a little bit more. So blending, softening, that just means coming in and basically preventing these hard edges from forming in your watercolour. And as long as you're painting with plenty of water, you'll be able to do that no problem. Going to pop a little bit of blue in some of these windows, just as a little lightener. It takes away from the shadow. It makes it more, well, it feels like the sky is reflecting in those shadows. It just makes it feel happier to me. And that's it, really quick. That is step 3 done. Now, the problem with loose colours is they feel scary. So at this stage it looks like, well, it looks scary, it looks messy, it looks like, how can we possibly get something good, something structured out of the end of this? But we will. So just have a bit of faith, be loose, let things flow, and just know that you're going to bring it back in your later steps. So for now, I'm going to let this dry and we'll come back shortly and we'll do our more controlled colours. So here we are, mostly dry, and what we're going to do, like I said, some more controlled colours. So now we're going to start using our 3 primary colours and pulling out key sort of areas, key highlights. I'm going to start with my red, just use simple red, and I'm going to find some of these lovely sort of tops of the doors. We've got a red one here, we've got a red one along a bit, a couple of like red patches halfway up the buildings as well, and going into the distance we've got a few sort of red flecks here and there. We've even got a little bit of red on the top of one of these buildings back here, and we can just invent a couple of other bits as well. And we can also find, you know, some of our people, like this lady in the front's got a red top, and this chap on the side, perhaps he's got a red top, and this one, and just a few little touches like that. Next, we can take our yellow, mix it with our red, until we end up with a nice sort of deep orange. We can use that deep orange, maybe just a touch of blue in there as well, to make it more mellow, more like a brown. And we can use that to start getting the woodwork here, look. So all of this sort of wood feeling area, we can now get in with this mix of colours. And equally, if you didn't want to just use 3 colours, you could just take something straight out of your palette, and that's fine as well. You could use like a burnt umber, burnt sienna, something like that. Underneath here, where we've got all this shadow, now that we've got light colours, I'm going to re-emphasise the shadow with the moon glow. And equally, just in these windows, we can now just re-emphasise between this lovely light wood colour that we've got some shadows. And that's the windows. And again, a little touch of blue in there just to suggest some light reflecting down. And we can sort of continue this process going along. So if we just take even more blue, make it even more mellow, we can just get some of these dull brick colours in. On top of that yellow, remember, we already got that lovely yellow in. We can just miss out a building and leave it yellow, then move on to the next one, have it brown. Then we've got some sort of blue stuff going on in the next building, so we add a bit more blue. And as we get into the distance, the colours naturally become muted, so they naturally actually become a little more blue anyway. So we can add even more blue and have it just fade off into the distance. Coming back forwards, let's just get these shadows in these reflected windows as well. So just coming back in on top of that yellow. And bring that down, soften it. And that's what watercolours is about. It's a gradual softening, layering, softening, layering. Now I'm going to get a nice green, so green of course just being yellow and blue, and varying it between how much yellow, how much blue, lets us get a nice rich green. I'm actually going to go even richer than that. There we go. That's now our tree. And then down this side, we need a bit more shadow now, don't we? So get more of our moon glow and we can just bring that shadow in. We can leave areas light as well. So you see how this clock face seems quite light. So we leave it light. I'm going to leave the windows light, even though they're dark, because what we can then do is come back and really layer up and really show how dark they are. But they've also got these bright blue reflections in that you can see in a couple of them. So I don't want to overdo the dark without thinking about it a little bit more. So that's that done. Then with that reflection, I'll bring in the blue. So really just looking at these hints of colour and then really just going for it and being a bit bold and deciding what does that image need, not just what does it look like in the reference, what does it need. So for example, maybe it needs a bit more darkness under here to really give structure to this building. Maybe it needs more blue in the windows like I've done here than it naturally has, just to give it a bit of light, stop it being too monotonic. And what else is there left to do? Well look, a couple more bits could do with more fun colour, couldn't they? So let's get this blue, this blue, And let's just make this building more sort of pink. It feels pink in the reference, so let's give it that lovely pink tinge. Let's take this blue and let's just get this tarmac a little bit more grubby, and then a bit more shadow coming across as well. What I'm trying to do is get the shadow going in between these people at the front so that we can bring them out as highlights, perhaps just using like a yellow for a couple of the people, the red for that one, blue for someone else over here, blue for these trousers, you know, just taking colours we want to use and seeing what happens. Again, we can make some of our people going back here, little blue dots, blue trousers, that kind of thing. And there we go. So that is the end of step 4. Now what I'm going to do, let that dry, and we'll come back in for step 5, regaining the structure, finishing it off with a lovely bit of ink. So we are done and it's dry. We're just going to come back in with our ink, step 5, and we're going to just find our shapes again. And as we find our shapes again, things will become clearer. Things will stop being so messy. They'll be more structured. And actually, suddenly this image will come to life. So I'm going to do the same process as we did at the start. Just coming round, finding these key shapes. And finding the little shapes, the big shapes. Oh, and has my pen run out of ink? Well, one way to find out, I'm just going to squeeze my plunger a little bit. Oh, and there we go. So I don't think it's run out. I think what's happened is just where this paper is a little bit wet, it absorbs the ink too quickly. And there we go, we got it flowing again. So, like I said, we're going around, we're finding these shapes and just adding a bit more structure to them. And this works for even the messiest of image. It means even with the messiest, loosest colours, we're able to come in and refine that key structure and really provide something for the viewer to look at and just direct their sight around the page. Then I'm going to pop over to the other side here and find this top line first and just work with the colours however they've decided to end up. Just work with them and then find these little shapes inside, and look how much bolder the ink is now. Look how much structure this simple ink line imparts on our image. So you need to be careful not to overdo it, if anything, at this stage, but it's also very easy to just really quickly come in and redefine all these shapes, no matter how loose we've been with our colours. We can find, remember these lovely lights that we put in, which are sort of faded into the distance a bit? We can find them again. We can pop them in and we can move them around to suit our image as well, suit what's happened on the page. Pop in our pavement going up here. Give it a shape by giving it a double edge. Same with this pavement here. It kind of disappears around the corner underneath all this sort of tangled mess of greenery. Now, a little bit more that we could do. We could define some of these shadows a bit better. Pop in a bit more dark hatching. Pop in some sort of textural lines on the road if we want to just fill in that gap. And we could even apply some real high contrast in places. Just simple touches like this can really lift an image. Maybe even apply some high contrast to some of these lamps. I know they're supposed to be light, but why don't we make them stand out by making them so dark and bold? Some of our people as well we could do the same with. We could make them little black figures going into the distance. And just really regather that sort of challenge of busyness and noise going back. What about this clock? Why don't we add, just a simple touch would be to add this sort of arms of the clock on, wouldn't it? So let's just do that little simple thing. We've got this wire as well going off into the distance. We've got this little pole coming up into the sky. All of these things are things you can think about adding. You don't have to, but just little touches. Maybe increasing the contrast in some of these windows will really help the scene, give it an extra dimension. And a little bit more on this tree. And there we go. So don't forget to sign and be proud of what you've done. You know, this is a really quick sketch using a 1-point perspective where we just mapped out those little lines at the beginning to make it really easy. We treated the perspective as if it's a shape rather than worrying too much about tons of structural lines. Then we applied some loose colours, some bolder colours, and then we refound all that structure with some bold lines at the end. And this is how you can make sketching and urban sketching really simple, make it really approachable, just by having a loose approach and being aware that, you know, whatever happens, you're always going to be able to regather that structure at the end. You're always going to be able to rework a bit of magic into it at the end. If you've enjoyed this, please do let me know. Leave a comment. If you haven't enjoyed it, let me know why not and what you would have done differently. Like and subscribe if you want to see more of my content. It's a huge support to my channel. And of course, it's been a pleasure sketching along with you today. So thank you very much, and please go out, enjoy yourself and be creative. Happy sketching. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.